Now, remember, amid rising concern over the fragile environment of the Himalayas, the Supreme Court has warned that unchecked tourism could make states like Himachal Pradesh vanish into thin air. The fragile Himalayan ecosystem is once again under stress as Uttarakhand faces a second cloudburst at Suki Top near Dharali. Look at the visuals on your screens. Following an earlier one near Harsi in Uttarkashi, several people are feared missing and dead as the Khir Ganga stream overflowed, causing significant destruction. But let's also tell you that rescue operations by the SDRF, Army and the local police are underway. But given what we're looking at, where clearly nature's fury is at the worst, it has been captured even on camera, that particular moment absolutely devastating. But the overall situation is absolutely concerning. For more on that, let me go across to my guest joining us this evening, Vimlendu Jha, environmentalist. Vimlendu, thank you for taking the time out. Always a pleasure to have you on our show. Hope you're doing well, in fact. But Vimlendu, given the fact that given your own decades of work in environmental conservation, how do you see the Uttarkashi disaster? As an isolated extreme weather event, perhaps not, given, we keep looking at this, or is a systematic warning of the Himalayan over-exploitation?
I think it would be a great disservice to people of the Himalayas and of this country if we actually call this just an event. We'll have to start calling this a phenomena. It's not just this year that the cloudburst has taken place. Cloudburst has been happening. Of course, your program talked about it and everyone else, from 2013 of Kedarnath to what is happening in Sikkim. So from Ladakh to Arunachal, we've actually seen in the last 1 decade several of these weather events or climate events that have actually taken place. Right now, this particular 2 cloudburst that is getting reported, and by the way, we only report a few of the cloudbursts, and there perhaps would be more than a dozen cloudbursts that have taken place in last 1 week alone in Uttarakhand, and in last 1 month, we've seen the kind of landslides and nature's fury and in inverted commas, nature fury reported from several parts of Himachal Pradesh as well. The reason why I said that to call it nature's fury is a little, dishonest, because at the end of the day, indeed, cloudburst doesn't happen because of a human error or because of a short circuit, and therefore cloudburst indeed is a natural phenomena. But the making of this so-called natural phenomena called cloudburst is because of the way we've actually been systematically over decades, damaged our environment. And when we damage our environment and climate, which increases the frequency of these climate events, both frequency and intensity of our climate events, that's where more ecologically fragile zones actually are more vulnerable. And this is what we've seen, that despite several warnings given by experts in terms of what sort of development and construction activities should be allowed in an ecologically fragile zone of Himalayas, we haven't really heard or we haven't really done anything about it. Imagine the Char Dham road project, more than 800 kilometers, almost 900-kilometer road project was actually constructed, without any environmental impact assessment. And why did that happen? Because in the name of national interest, national security, in terms of convenience, in terms of faster mobility, we ended up really plundering the entire Himalayas. By the way, in those visuals, it's very important for your viewers to understand that what's actually flowing in that water is not just water alone. It's actually silt and rocks and debris and waste that's actually been dumped in various parts of the Himalayas in most of the river bodies. So in the name of broadening of the roads, we haven't really taken care of the topsoil or the geological structure of the Himalayas. We haven't taken care of the slope, which is primarily how much slope should actually be maintained and what sort of construction should be allowed. The thousands of trees that we've actually cut so as to broaden the roads, and then all the silt that has actually come out, the mud and the debris that has been taken out for this road construction project actually has been dumped in our waterways and here our river bodies. So it's fine, as it's a very, very sad day, and we need to think about people who are still trapped. But this is also to fix responsibility and accountability.
But given what the Supreme Court, Vimlendu, apologies for interjecting you there, given what the top court has also made observations, given, the Himalayan ecology as well, where they've said, there are, of course, several parts. We'll try putting that on our screens for our viewers to better understand that. But just going through the top 3 comments by the top court, that the day is not far when Himachal may vanish from the country's map. Given that particular ecology system, you're looking at how the court has said that nature is annoyed with the activities going on in Himachal, and humans, not nature, are responsible for continuous landslides. All in all, make of those remarks as well, given the fact that concurrently, when we talk about this, Vimlendu, most often than not, Himalayan ecology is often discussed in policy circles as well. But in practice, do you think environmental safeguards have been reduced to procedural approvals rather than genuine checks?
That's exactly what has happened in Char Dham project. Imagine, as per Supreme Court own law, where for every road project that's beyond 100 kilometers needs an environmental impact assessment. Very mischievously, what Government of India actually did for Char Dham project. And I'm not talking about a political party. It could be any political party that could be in power and would actually perhaps do the same, because for them, development is a very, very myopic understanding. What happened in Char Dham road project is this entire 889-kilometer Char Dham road project was actually divided into 53 smaller projects. And this was done so that length of each project was less than 100 kilometers, and therefore no environmental impact assessment study or consultation with locals or geological understanding and parameters of geology could be taken into account. And that's the reason why this project became like one of the star projects right now. It made our life, so-called life, very, very convenient in terms of our mobility. But that's where, when the Supreme Court of our country actually makes a rule, makes a law, when the experts of our country talk about the carrying capacity of the Himalayas, and despite that, in the name of national security or in the name of national progress, we end up constructing. Nobody's against the roads. But imagine the road that you want to build in perhaps a Gurgaon or Jaipur has to be very, very different from the kind of road that you actually want to build in Uttarkashi. We do not need a 4-lane highway, and we do not, maybe that's the reason why ecological carrying capacity is a very, very scientific term. So I think it's loss of scientific acumen in our governance, in our planning, and that's where Supreme Court last week, when it said that perhaps Himachal Pradesh will disappear. 200 people have lost their lives in just this season in that sense. And by the way, as I said, you can't just look at cloudburst. We'll have to look at heat waves. We have to look at deforestation. We have to look at lake bursts that actually happened a couple of years ago in Sikkim. So all these weather events, and then drought situation in Shimla and other places. So you have no water 1 month, very, very abrupt snowfall happening in certain areas. And then this entire more than 100 water in a short duration of time, which is called cloudburst, happening again and again. So these are, nature has been showing us signs to behave ourselves for almost a decade and a half now. And despite that, I think in our quest and in our greed and in our lack of common sense understanding, we are on that path of destruction. And destruction, it's the only thing is that it's not a short-term destruction alone. The impact that this would have, loss of Himalayas is not loss of real estate or loss of a mountain, loss of a tree. We're talking about the entire Indian ecology and North Indian climate. And here, by climate, I just don't mean temperature here. Our entire rainfall patterns, our rivers come out of that area, entire cold barrier that we actually have. Himalayas is our main barrier. So Himalayas have a very, very great
the aspect of the
significance in our
sharp
water
remarks also
management.
that you're putting into perspective. You're right, and you have, of course, spoken about that on multiple aspects. But taking a cue from what you said, infrastructure is one aspect of it. But talking about these regions as well, tourism, infrastructure, and livelihoods are often pitched against conservation. But is there a model you believe can reconcile these priorities without inviting disasters? In the wake of what we're looking at, with Uttarkashi as well, what immediate course corrections would you urge both state and central governments to implement? Because we're talking about loss of lives as well. And repeatedly, like you put that.
Place appropriate, geology appropriate, ecology appropriate development is what we all need. Nobody's anti-development. Nobody is saying that there should not be any electricity, or there should be no road, or there should not be any buildings, and people should be staying in lanterns in these areas because development is a bad word. Development itself is not a bad word, but again, that's the reason why I said the carrying capacity and appropriate to the place we need to actually have these constructions. In these visuals that you're actually showing on the riverbed, we have those hotels and those constructions that are taking place. In Kedarnath, we had similar thing. So in 2013, Kedarnath, which perhaps would not be more than 100 kilometers from this particular valley, we had such a disaster where thousands of people lost their lives, bodies never found. And what lessons did we actually learn? And we allowed the mushrooming of such structures to take place. Fine, these are not government buildings and government is not the violator, but government cannot be just the one that will allow such construction activities to take place. And as I said, many of these many of the other developmental activities that we're talking about, with construction of tunnels, we've seen last year a town called Joshimath sinking. Before that, we saw indeed what I've been saying, that Joshimath and Cloudburst. This year itself, we've seen so many activities. So when climate change is no more an academic discourse, climate change is something which is happening here and now. And it actually affects, perhaps climate change affects the poor the more. Poorest of the poor get affected more because of climate related events and activities, because there's no work from home for people who have actually lost their homes in this particular disaster that we're actually talking about. And therefore, it has a socio-economic long-term impact on the area.
Long-term impact, glaring signs, but the only question is, when that ground reality is going to change, because that is clearly the need of the hour, like you have put that into perspective. But Vimlendu, I'm afraid we're short of time, but on that note, I want to thank you very much for joining us on ET Now this evening, given how you're looking at this situation as well. But for the moment, we not just leave the conversation at that, we're also wrapping this edition of News Now. Thank you very much for joining us this evening.